Let's turn our attention to both required and permitted uses and disclosures of PHI. Here's what HIPAA has to say about using and disclosing protected health information. You may not use or disclose PHI except as permitted or required by the HIPAA rules. So what does that mean? It means PHS is required to disclose PHI to the patient or legal guardian, and when required by law, as we discussed in previous slides. Whereas PHS is permitted to use and disclose PHI for the following purposes: for treatment of the patient, payment, and general healthcare operations, pursuant to a valid authorization made by the individual who is the subject of the health information, by agreement of the individual or personal representative of the individual, by business associates with a valid signed business associate agreement on file with PHS, and finally by authorized workforce members of PHS to the extent that they only use or disclose the minimum amount of information necessary to complete their job. Before you access PHI, you must first have authorization to do so based on your PHS role and responsibilities. There are some positions who have no access to PHI, and that's okay. Remember, access is based on the individual's job responsibilities. IT will establish and maintain access to all electronic PHI, such as network folders, CPR Plus, and Insight. Access to PHI is not static. It will change as the employee's job responsibilities change. For example, moving into another department or role will dictate the extent of PHI access required for that role. It's important to remember all PHI access is limited to only legitimate clinical and business needs. You are not permitted to access PHI beyond the scope of your job duties. For example, if you're a clinician answering a patient troubleshooting call, you may access the patient's CPR Plus account to review information needed for that troubleshooting call, as well as documenting the call. However, you are not permitted to access a patient's CPR Plus account because you saw a news story on the patient and were curious about additional details. That's actually considered a violation of the patient's HIPAA rights. Accessing a patient record without a legitimate clinical or business need will result in disciplinary action, including termination. Breaches in violation of HIPAA's privacy and security rules have serious ramifications for all involved. These are federal laws with statutory and regulatory penalties for violations, including civil and criminal monetary penalties, and yes, even jail time. The privacy rule requires PHS provide patients with a notice on how their medical information may be used or disclosed and how they can access their health information. PHS meets this requirement through our Notice of HIPAA Privacy Practice, as displayed here on the slide. It describes PHS's health information responsibilities, how we use and disclose the patient's protected health information, the patient's privacy rights, and how to file a privacy complaint. This two-page Notice of HIPAA Privacy Practice is provided in the Care and Service booklet. Additionally, the privacy notice is also found on our PHS website and is posted in the public front reception area. Let's spend a few minutes to go through the patient's privacy rights. We'll start with the right to access. Patients have the right to see or get a copy of their medical record and other health information we have about them. We do request all patients complete an authorization form prior to releasing their records. Patients also have a right to choose someone to act for them. If the patient has given someone medical power of attorney, or if someone is their legal guardian, that person can exercise rights and make choices about the patient's health care, and PHS will follow them. These two forms are PHS's Release of Information Authorization forms. They can be accessed in M-Files and are interactive. One is labeled Permission for PHS to Release Protected Health Information, and the other is labeled Permission for PHS to Request Protected Health Information. Once these forms are completed and signed by the patient or legal representative, the privacy officer will review all medical record release requests, and the medical records department will process them. The next patient privacy right is the right to amend. All patients have the right to request we correct or amend their medical record when they think their health information is either incorrect or incomplete. PHS is not required to honor the request, but must supply a written denial if not honored. Patients have the right to request confidential communications. They can ask PHS to contact them in a specific way or in a specific form. PHS will honor all reasonable requests, such as send mail to a different address or a P.O. box, or calling during a certain time of the day. Patients also have the right to request restrictions. They can ask PHS not to use or share certain health information for treatment, payment, or healthcare operations. If a patient requests restrictions, we will ask them to put the request in writing. PHS is not required to agree to the request, and we may say no if we believe it will affect the patient's care. Additionally, if the patient pays for a service or healthcare item out of pocket and in full, they can ask us not to share that information for the purpose of payment or operations with their health insurer. PHS is required to honor those requests, unless a specific law requires us to share that information. Patients have the right to ask for a list or an accounting of the times we've shared their health information, who we shared it with, and why, for up to 6 years prior to the date they ask. PHS will include all disclosures except those for treatment, payment, healthcare operations, and certain other disclosures as required by law. All accidental disclosures will be included in an accounting of disclosures to the patient. And finally, patients have the right to make a complaint if at any time they feel we have violated their privacy rights. They are encouraged to file a complaint by contacting our privacy officer either by mail or by phone. The patient or patient's legal guardian also has a right to file a complaint with the United States Department of Health and Human Services, Office of Civil Rights. We will not punish the patient in any way for filing any complaint.